Welcome to The Bottom Line, a wrap of the business news of the day. Now, one of the most controversial aspects of yesterday's medium-term budget policy statement was a 10.5 billion rand allocation for the business rescue of SAA. Let's get the take of unions who've been fighting for the jobs of workers at SAA. We're now joined by NUMSA spokesperson Phakamile Hlubi-Majola and the SA Cabin Crew Association spokesperson Zazi, Zazi Nsibanyoni-Mugambi. Thank you for joining me. Phakamile, can I start with you and just get your take actually on what was announced yesterday?
Good evening and good evening to your viewers. Thank you for having me. For us, really, it's been a long time, this funding for the business plan. As you recall, in December, when government made the decision to voluntarily place the airline under business rescue, they assured and made promises that they would fund that restructuring. So the fact that finally this money and the allocation has been made is something that we welcome. Our members are relieved, because they really have suffered during this process. It has been a lengthy business rescue process. In the process, workers have not received salaries for 5 months or more. Some have lost assets, houses, children kicked out of school. It's been extremely traumatic for our members and made worse by the fact that at the end of this process, the restructured SAA that will come out from this will be an SAA with half the number of staff members. So really, the working class has paid a very, very high cost for this funding for the airline.
Zazi, turning to you, I mean, I understand that people suffer when there are job losses, but looking at South Africa as a whole, I mean, there's such outrage. Do you feel like you're the only ones happy about this? People complaining that money is coming from things like education, things like health, to save this airline that has been bailed out over and over again since the dawn of democracy.
Yes, I suppose the minister deliberately framed the bailout, the 10.5 bailout, in a speech to allude to the fact that this 10.5 billion is coming from the police. Very many is taking away from these people. But where he does not take accountability is that it's his government. They are the shareholder that's been in charge of SAA for all these years. And they have watched as we complained, we picketed, we wrote letters, we went to court, we were making noise about various corruption reports. They have stood by and done nothing about it. So I wish the minister would have taken accountability for the role that they have played in where SAA finds itself today. And people are upset. But at the end of the day, the workers are the ones that have paid the price. And we make a point to say that going forward, the management and the board that have led us to such dire straits must go. We need a fresh board. We need a fresh management team that is able to take the reins and take the new SAA and make it flourish. The anger must be really directed at the right place. And the ordinary worker did not create the situation. Yeah. They merely came to work and signed off and did what they were told. And these people have paid the biggest price for where they find themselves today.
But the bigger question, and maybe you can come in here, Phakamile, is do we need a state airline at all? Does it need to be saved? Surely it's not strategic. There'll always be airlines. People can fly. Ministers can find flights. Business people can get to where they're going to. And some are asking, why couldn't government and why couldn't you as unions this time finally just let it go?
Because that would be a very irresponsible thing to do. SAA is not just an airline. SAA contributes over 34,000 jobs in the value chain in South Africa. And anybody who calls for the collapse of SAA, as we've heard from the likes of the DA and Outer and others, is actually being grossly reckless and irresponsible. Are you telling me that we can afford to pay the socio-economic cost of 34,000 workers who suddenly find themselves jobless? I really think that people really need to rethink the logic behind what they're saying. And I also think that it's important that people must remember who we're dealing with here. Treasury was very mischievous to couch that statement as if they are taking money from departments. Anybody who's been reading Tito Mbowene's statements on Treasury should know very well that from the time that he was appointed, his agenda was job cuts. His agenda was austerity measures. So when we see money being taken from various departments, it's part of Tito's agenda. And frankly, he's obnoxious to turn this around and make it like this was a sacrifice that he made to save SAA at the expense of these departments. That's completely unfair, and it's rewriting history, and it's also cleansing this government of the responsibilities that they hold for the demise of this airline and for the position that we find ourselves in today. Had they funded Vuyani Jagana's turnaround strategy in 2018, when all he needed was an additional 12.5 billion rand, we wouldn't be in this mess today.
Yeah. Final question on this. I mean, Zazi, isn't the idea that if the state doesn't get involved in a competitive industry and prop up one player and prop up jobs in that one player as well, you actually in the end could have lower costs, more competition, and probably more jobs actually in efficient private airlines. Your response to that?
Well, I don't see a domestic carrier doing it in this current climate. So what you're actually saying is open up the market to international carriers. You'll see Ethiopian take off. You'll see Emirates. You'll see all these international players take off. And I think it's irresponsible to give our market share to the international world. We have a role to play. The shareholder must really regulate its involvement in SAA going forward. But we cannot sit back and say SAA does not play a role in the economy. We do. And just to also say, for outer to come, I mean, we've been there. We have been in many platforms saying, we want to talk about corruption. We want to deal with the mismanagement. And where was outer all along? Now all of a sudden they have a voice, have done nothing to support our calls for anti-corruption. And to tell people not to fly SAA is reckless, because what you're actually saying is this 10.5 billion must go down the drain. If you say no one must fly us, so they're setting it up for failure. And they must also be very aware that SAA would have been worse off if it was liquidated. Yeah. So I think people really need to start being responsible, putting the blame where it belongs. Unions will rally behind the new management team. We'll make sure that this airline takes off and becomes successful. We'll make sacrifices where we want to make sacrifices. But we need a good team. We need a competent board. We need people that are agile and are able to make decisions. And people at the top also make decisions. And government just step back a little bit and let SAA do what it needs to do to survive.
You spoke about market share, but there's even talk of Ethiopian Airlines taking a share. Don't you expect some private player to come in when the new SAA, whatever it's called, sort of rises from the ashes? What are you expecting when that finally happens?
Well, we're expecting something similar to what Vuyani Jagana was saying, collaboration, a joint venture. And we absolutely will back that up, because that can only uplift the airline. But we are not open for complete privatization, but we will support joint ventures with various airlines. And we actually believe that in Africa, we actually should start to collaborate more and build, the African market, and also monopolize it like other airlines have done in other countries and continents.
Phakamile, finally, over what's happened over the last few months, retrenchments, you said people not getting paid. How many people are actually left at SAA to benefit when it does get configured?
According to the business rescue plan, at takeoff, SAA will start with 1,000 employees and 1,000 on the training layoff scheme. The remainder would have to take either voluntary severance packages or they would have to be retrenched. So effectively, this is why we're saying that for us to get here, heavy prices have had to be paid. The only way that we can guarantee that the same mistakes are not made and repeated with this restructured airline is we need a board that's going to act in the interests of the airline. As unions, and NUMSA in particular has said this at various platforms, that it's time that SOE boards were had trade union representation there. We play an oversight role. We can ensure that the money which taxpayers have allowed and funded to these SOEs is spent properly, because it was our members who raised the alarm around corruption and mismanagement at SAA, and it is a tragedy today that it is workers and their families who are paying the highest price. We cannot have a repetition going forward. Things must change if we are not.
Should South Africans believe you? Because unions have been there. You say you've been raising the alarm, but can you really stop looting in future and ensure that this is a well-run, efficient, state-owned airline?
At the end of the day, it's also going to take political will, Francis, because it's a fact that DPE and Treasury dropped the ball. I mean, I think that's just being kind about it. But when it comes to the way that state-owned entities have been run in this country, quite frankly, it's a disaster. And there's a lot of responsibility and accountability on the side of government. And this is why we're saying going forward, things have to change. Trade unions, civil society and NGOs must find representation on boards of SOEs so that we can safeguard the interests of the greater public.
All right, thank you for your time tonight. That was NUMSA spokesperson Phakamile Hlubi-Majola and SA Cabin Crew Association Zazi Nsibanyoni-Mugambi.